Hey everyone, it's Saoirse, and today I have Caddy with me, and we're in a weird location with a velvet curtain. It's very exciting, because today we're going to talk about The Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, I know I said earlier this year that I was going to try to get through all of Fitzgerald's books. I'm only on the second. This is his second book. It was published in 1922, so I'll read you the back if you're unfamiliar with it. It says F. Scott Fitzgerald's second novel brilliantly satirizes a glamorous and doomed marriage in the decadent high society of New York City in the 1920s. Inspired in part by Fitzgerald's own tumultuous union with his wife Zelda, The Beautiful and Damned chronicles the downfall of would-be jazz-age aristocrats, I always want to say aristocats, Anthony and Gloria Patch. The novel introduces us to the pleasure-seeking Anthony and his beautiful, vain, and shallow golden girl just after their marriage, when, believing a large inheritance to be imminent, they begin living well beyond their means. When the expected windfall is withheld, their lives are consumed by the pursuit of wealth, and their alliance begins to disintegrate. Haunting and keenly observed, The Beautiful and Damned provides a vivid portrait of a lost world and the rootless and materialistic generation that inhabited it. Okay, so let's just start by saying all the characters are unlikable in this book. I did not really enjoy his first book either, which was The Side of Paradise. I didn't love it. I could recognize things that were technically good about it, but I didn't want to hang out with that character, and I did not want to hang out with these people. I don't know what I was expecting. I guess I was expecting, because I liked The Great Gatsby, that I would like his other books, but it really feels like the same stories over and over. Unlikable people trying to get wealthy or stay wealthy in New York City in the 20s. But Anthony and Gloria are absolutely horrible, awful people that I just was bummed the whole time. So for me, this is too long to be satire, because it's almost 400 pages, and that's a lot of time to be spending with characters that you know that you're just making fun of because they suck. It would have been, I think, a great short story, because a short story doesn't really require anyone for you to root for. Like, you can write a short story that's 15-20 pages about an absolute piece of crap person, and it's okay because we're not going to be hanging out with them for that long. And you can get your point across of satirizing whatever this person is like, in this case, people who are just obsessed with wealth and status. That would have been great as a short story. It was so much. Yeah. Didn't love it, but at the same time, that being said, I unfortunately related to a lot of stuff that like I hated about the characters, which really made me feel great. You know, seeing yourself reflected in characters that are absolutely awful is always a wonderful feeling. So let us just read some of the passages that stood out to me, because just because I didn't like the characters and didn't want to root for them, and whether they succeeded or not, whatever, because they were awful. That aside, some of the writing in here is really great, and Fitzgerald always has these turns of phrase that are unique, things I haven't heard before, or just things that made me think for a while. So Anthony's friend is working on a book, and it says, Anthony was glad he wasn't going to work on his book. The notion of sitting down and conjuring up not only words in which to clothe thoughts, but thoughts worthy of being clothed. The whole thing was absurdly beyond his desires. So, I know this is done throughout all literature, but especially like Fitzgerald's time, I feel like writers were always talking about being writers, and he definitely was doing that. And like knowing a bit of his backstory and how he like had to churn out so many short stories to make money, because that, and he even mentions it in here, that's the thing that at least then made money. and it wasn't the novels that he wanted to write. It was, he had to just keep writing these stories that he didn't like at all. So it's kind of meta, like talking about writing in your writing, which I don't always love, but since I write, I say that I'm a writer, but it's very rare that I actually feel like sitting down and writing. Hi, sweetheart. I love you. Yeah, so like Anthony talks a lot about how he's gonna write something, but here's his friend who is writing what seems like crap, and then it ends up being so successful, and the guy is actually a, best-selling writer. For Anthony to watch that happen while he's all just talk and he's too lazy to actually write, that kind of hurt. That hurt my soul because I've been there. Okay, so there's a lot of sense of isolation and basically a fear of doing anything, a fear of like getting started with your life. And so this passage is good. There were the bells and the continued low blur of auto horns from Fifth Avenue, but his own street was silent, and he was safe in here from all the threat of life, for there was his door and the long hall and his guardian bedroom. Safe, safe. The arc light shining into his window seemed for this hour like the moon, only brighter and more beautiful than the moon. Oh, it's just so sad. Like, I hate this guy, but I also understand some of who he is, and just feeling safe in your little space, like protecting you from the world and from ever having to have a life. I think a lot of us can relate to that, at least from the past, like, 2 years of the pandemic. And some of us relate to it all the time, just needing a space where we can get away from the world, but then using that as a coping mechanism and a crutch to not actually participate. Though there's a lot of fear of old age in here too, which I really relate to and is terrifying. Yeah. Another winter. Maury's voice from the window was almost a whisper. We're growing old, Anthony. I'm 27, by God. 3 years to 30, and then I'm what an undergraduate calls a middle-aged man. And I'm 27, so that was a painful sentence. And in the scheme of things, 27 doesn't seem that old, but I feel like I turned 21 yesterday, and I'm not joking when I say that. I know that a lot has happened in between in those years, but it truly goes faster and faster and faster every year, which is not an encouraging thought. And so there was a lot in here that I was just very upset by. This was not an uplifting book. Okay, and there's a lot in here that's like anti-labor, because these people are wealthy and mistakenly think they're always going to be wealthy. There's a lot of talk about work. And I won't get into it extensively now because I will just chat forever. But this pretty much says it. But I want to know just why it's impossible for an American to be gracefully idle. His words gathered conviction. It astonishes me. I don't understand why people think that every young man ought to go downtown and work 10 hours a day for the best 20 years of his life at dull, unimaginative work, certainly not altruistic work. Just let that sink in. So many people spend most of their life, most of their waking hours, working, usually for jobs that they don't find fulfilling, because most jobs aren't fulfilling. Of course, there are some that are, and those people are very lucky to love what they do, but most people just have to work to live, and usually live paycheck to paycheck. And the fact that you go and spend all day doing this thing that you don't necessarily love so that you can keep the roof over your head, where, like, in a place where you hardly ever exist anyway because you're always at work, and then you retire and then you die. Yeah, there was a lot about that sort of panic in here of, like, I can't work because then I'm wasting my whole life. but then they go the other direction, which is really scary, and I feel attacked by as well, which is not working at all or not working enough, and then not knowing what to do with yourself because you're not doing, like, they're just totally trapped. They're not doing anything fulfilling. They're just partying pretty much. So they feel useless, and that can make time seem even scarier than having a job sometimes. A lot of existential dread in here. This part's sad. He shut the door and, coming back into the room, stood for a moment lost in thought with the tennis ball still clasped in his hand. There was one of his lonelinesses coming. One of those times when he walked the streets or sat aimless and depressed, biting a pencil at his desk. It was a self-absorption with no comfort, a demand for expression with no outlet, a sense of time rushing by, ceaselessly and wastefully, assuaged only by that conviction that there was nothing to waste, because all efforts and attainments were equally valueless. So, I've spent a lot of the past year not working since I lost my job due to the pandemic, and that really hit me. And there's such a big sense of nihilism in my life, and kind of feeling like no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. Nothing you do is going to matter, so why do anything? That's kind of just always there in my head, and I really fight that because I use it as a coping mechanism, because I want to believe, like, oh, nothing matters, so it's okay if everything just goes to hell. But then you're just sort of sitting there with this, if nothing matters, why don't I just do nothing? Yeah. Painful thoughts. Painful thoughts in here. Happiness requires misery. Let's see. Oh yeah, this line. Happiness, remarked Maury Noble one day, is only the first hour after the alleviation of some especially intense misery. Which gets me thinking, is misery our natural state? I've been reading this philosophy book lately about cats and how their natural state is just content, and it feels like humans, our natural state is to be the opposite of that. And so we only recognize happiness when it's in contrast to great misery, which sucks. That's a sad thought. So this character, Gloria, she's like a little bit more likable than Anthony, because I can have some sympathy for her. I mean, women were treated absolutely terribly, and she's just kind of groomed to be what she is. And after she marries Anthony, she kind of gets to thinking about what she's lost in her life, since now she's sort of trapped. She was in love now, set for the eternal romance that was to be the synthesis of all romance, yet sad for these men and these moonlights, and for the thrills she had had, and the kisses. The past, her past, oh what a joy, she had been exuberantly happy. So she's looking back at all the, dates she's gone on with men and all these love affairs, and looks at it through this lens of, well, now I'm trapped forever in this relationship, and this is the thing that I always wanted. This is the thing we're supposed to always want. And now that I've got it, there's the sadness of finally getting what you want, because there's nothing to look forward to anymore. And it makes you look back at your past in a way that maybe your past didn't really exist in that way, but it looks a lot better to you now because of the way that you feel stuck. Like, not striving for something is a difficult place to be in, because I think striving, it really just keeps us going. So Anthony and Gloria are talking about preserving antiques and old buildings, and how they kind of turn into like a carnival with people buying tickets to go see these places, like historic buildings. Don't you want to preserve old things? But you can't, Anthony. Beautiful things grow to a certain height and then they fail and fade off, breathing out memories as they decay. And just as any period decays in our minds, the things of that period should decay too. And in that way they're preserved for a while in the few hearts like mine that react to them. Which is an interesting way to look at it because, you know, I'm obsessed with antiques and practically all my furniture is antique. And I do believe in preserving things, but she has a point in that it is depressing because they're not at their full glory anymore. They're obviously, like historic buildings, they're never going to look or feel exactly the way that they did when they were built and filled with the people that lived in that time period. So it makes you think, like, does beauty have to fade to be meaningful? Is it sad? Like, is a building being kept up and preserved as sad as an old person getting lots of surgery and dyeing their hair and trying to be young forever? Is that sad? Is it comparable? Or is there really no right way to age, whether you're a person or a building or a piece of furniture? Time doesn't mean anything, does it? What are we looking at? Oh yeah, so listlessly, Anthony dropped into a chair, his mind tired with nothing, tired with everything, with the world's weight he had never chosen to bear. He was ineffectual and vaguely helpless here as he had always been, one of those personalities who, in spite of all their words, are inarticulate. He seemed to have inherited only the vast tradition of human failure, that and the sense of death. And that passage, that was one that I just relate to way too much. Feeling ineffectual, inarticulate, only inheriting human failure in the sense of death. And this is where I see him being oppressed by having no responsibilities. Because nobody's expecting anything of him at this point. He's just useless. And it sucks because so much of my life I've spent like wishing to be done with school, to be done with everything, just to be done, and so that I can sit and not be bothered by anyone or anything and have nobody expect things of me. And then when those times actually happen and it's kind of you know, I tend to like go do something big and then I'll come home and do nothing for a while. And in those in-between times, that's where I'm like feeling like Anthony. And I do not want to relate to this guy. I really don't. What are we looking at now? 245. Fear of wasting your life is paralyzing. Okay. Anthony Patch had ceased to be an individual of mental adventure, of curiosity, and had become an individual of bias and prejudice, with a longing to be emotionally undisturbed. This gradual change had taken place through the past several years, accelerated by a succession of anxieties preying on his mind. There was, first of all, the sense of waste, always dormant in his heart, now awakened by the circumstances of his position. In his moments of insecurity, he was haunted by the suggestion that life might be, after all, significant. In his early 20s, the conviction of the futility of effort, of the wisdom of abnegation, had been confirmed by the philosophies he had admired, as well by his association with Maury Noble, and later with his wife. Yet there had been occasions, just before his meeting with Gloria, for example, and when his grandfather had suggested that he should go abroad as a war correspondent, upon which his dissatisfaction had driven him almost to a positive step. So it's like he's just watched his life pass him by. And because he fears that he's kind of missed every single point when he could have done something or been something, that now it's kind of too late. And I know I relate everything back to the fig tree in the bell jar. But everything does feel like that, doesn't it? Like, we're just sitting under this tree, and there are all these figs that are opportunities and things we could do and places we could go and people we could become. And we cannot choose one, so they all rot. And, I mean, this guy's a piece of crap and he's not comparable to Esther Greenwood, but like I feel like a lot of us experience that same thing, whether we're good people or bad people. We all experience this kind of paralyzing feeling of, I don't know what to choose. And if you watch The Good Place, it relates so much to Chidi and his horrible indecision. He can't decide about anything. And then you start thinking about all the ramifications of your actions, and not only how it would affect you. I don't think Anthony Patch would think how it affects other people, but like normal people would think about that. Oh wow, okay, so here's where we're gonna skip like 100 pages, because this whole section is just not exciting. Yeah, we're going all the way to the end here. Almost the end. And this is not a spoiler. The last thing he said to me, recollected Anthony, was that he was going to work so as to forget that there was nothing worth working for. Which is the classic death by labor. You just waste your life working, and you use it to distract you from the fact that all you can do is work, and that you'll just be working until you're dead. Super sad. So now I'm gonna say a few spoilers that are towards the end of the book, so you can drop out if you want to. But these are some things that just drove me nuts. The whole section where Anthony goes to war, or it's like boot camp or something, like he's been drafted. He never actually sees combat. But the fact that he goes and has an affair during this thing, it's just so, like, I don't want to read about this guy and the way that he suckers another young woman into being with him. It was painful to read. The whole thing was just, the book was just going more and more towards horrible sadness as it got closer to the end. And like, I guess you do get kind of that feeling in The Great Gatsby. I've got to read it again. But, and I understand the merit of it. Damn, it was so hard to, I like spite read the last 100 pages of this book because I didn't want to be reading it anymore. So I was like, get this done in one day and then say goodbye. Okay. One of the huge issues I have with this book is the amount of racism and sexism in here is so out of control. I don't remember things being that bad in The Great Gatsby, but I read it years ago, like a decade ago, so maybe it was, I don't remember. But they have a Japanese servant in this book, and the way that that character is written, he did not need to be written that way. It's Fitzgerald, like, right, he doesn't need to write it this way. The way that he mocks his speech, everything he says is like a joke. It's really, really offensive and hard to read. So yeah, not good. I was overall just disappointed by the story, by the characters, by the fact that he's kind of making the same point that he's made before, which, like, I do believe you can do that. I know there are a lot of writers that I love that will kind of tell the same story in every single book, and it's great and it works. In this case, I just felt like it was This Side of Paradise again, but so much worse. So, but I was disturbed by how much I related to some of the angst in this book. Yeah, so don't know if I'd recommend. I mean, you kind of make your own decision there. I just kind of like to torture myself by never quitting when I start a book. I never give up. And I like to read classics, and sometimes they're misses, you know, and sometimes they're hits. You can't win them all. But thank you so much for watching, and if you were watching this video, it means I managed to fix the part where my camera shut off halfway through and put two videos together, which I can never do because my computer doesn't understand things. So congratulate me if this actually is up. And I will see you all next time. Happy reading.